Robert Leroy Parker, also known as Butch Cassidy, the infamous bank and train robber from the American Old West era, is born April 13, 1866. As a young teenager, Cassidy works at several ranches to make ends meet, but by his early 20s, he's already committed his first bank robbery.
Butch Cassidy stands out in American history because he was the archetype for the hero/bandit.
He stands out to me as amongst the other bandits is because of his good nature, his charisma. People just were drawn to him. He was a natural leader.
In 1896, after being released from prison for stealing horses, Cassidy joins the infamous outlaw gang that the media calls Hole in the Wall Gang.
Well, as bad as they are, banks are better than trains. They don't move, they stay put. You know the money's in there.
In this 1969 movie, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, starring Paul Newman as Butch Cassidy and Robert Redford as the Sundance Kid, Cassidy is portrayed as a friendly, talkative character who, like the real Cassidy, commits bank and train robberies.
Rules! In a knife fight, no rules! What?
Well, if there ain't gonna be any rules, let's get the fight started. Someone count 1, 2, 3, go.
1, 2, 3, go.
By the late 1800s, American towns have become heavily reliant on the railroad system for transportation and communication. As a railroad bandit, Cassidy soon becomes a huge burden on the Union Pacific Railroad, forcing railroad officials to take action and organize with the law to capture him.
He robbed from the Union Pacific Railroad, which was probably the biggest corporate engine, literally, in the West.
Seeing that his close associates are either being killed or arrested, Butch fears for his own life and decides to seek amnesty from Utah Governor Eber M. Wells.
Butch had been hunted for years, and they were getting closer and closer, and a lot of his friends were being killed, and it was his last chance to have a regular life.
He requests for help from Sheriff Parley P. Christensen, friend of Cassidy's associate, who serves 2 terms as sheriff in Drop County from 1897 to 1904.
So he went to Christensen, gave him his Winchester 4440, turned in his jacket holster Colt 45, the black grips, and he went to the Capitol to talk to the governor. The governor said, look, we can give you amnesty as long as you haven't murdered anyone. And Butch replied, I've never murdered a man.
I think a lot of the lawmen that chased him liked him. They had respect for him. He wasn't this psychopathic type bandit, that would kill people. He was never, as far as we know, there's no record that he killed anybody.
In this 1974 article written for Guns Magazine, gun collector E. Dixon Larson writes, according to records, as an act of good faith, Butch surrendered his Colt number 158402 and holster, along with a Winchester 1873 carbine serial number 64876. A tag with the serial number and Sheriff Parley P. Christensen's name is then attached to the gun. Perhaps because he has a change of heart, he sees a new year and century approaching, or realizes that he can no longer defend himself from the law, Cassidy is motivated to come out from hiding by turning in the Colt 158402 in hopes that the law will give him a second chance.
You got to remember, it was 1899, October. The new year was coming. He wanted a new life. He wanted to get out of it. He wanted to start something new.
But soon after, with the belief that Cassidy has committed murder in the past, it is decided that Butch should receive no amnesty.
The DA was called and said there were murder charges against him, and his amnesty wasn't granted. He was told to go meet Union Pacific officials who never showed up. They were late. He said, forget it. And then he went and robbed another Union Pacific Railroad and left his guns in lockup with Christensen. He went to New York, and he went to South America, ending up in Bolivia.
It is during this time that he and his associates start a new gang. The media calls it the Wild Bunch. Testimonies differ on how and when he dies. Some historians say he dies in a shootout with Bolivian police. Lula Parker Bedenson, author of Butch Cassidy, My Brother, says otherwise, that he died many years later in the United States.
His sister swears up and down that he did not die in Bolivia.
Some of the historians will say, well, that's just an old lady talking, or, you know, that's anecdotal, they'll brush that off. But if you look at the Bolivian account, there's nothing strong there. There's no smoking gun.
Either way, the moment he decides to seek amnesty and turn in his Colt 158402 is the same moment a piece of American history is within reach of our hands.
I think it's an absolute treasure, one of a kind. I think it's the most well-documented Butch Cassidy Colt in existence.
I've heard of other Butch Cassidy guns, but this one definitely has the most documentation.
I mean, the first things first, on any Colt, you need the Colt Letter.
In 1898, according to historian Larry Poynter, author of Bandit Invincible and In Search of Butch Cassidy becomes George Leroy Parker in the media, and the two names are used interchangeably thereafter. The best portrayal of this use of names is evident in this document.
We have a court docket that shows when he gave the gun to Christensen in 1899.
In an interview with William Darby, one of Cassidy's associates, E. Dixon Larson quotes Darby as saying, "I remember Butch's Colt gun that he carried under his arm most of the time, and without a question,
this is it, 158402. He was the only one that I can recall who had a
E. Dixon Larson also writes that Charles Rich Hanks, a noted lawman, rancher, and friend of Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch, remembers the eagles on Butch's gun grips as being the only ones he had ever seen.
What's also interesting about his concealed Colt is that inside the grips, he put what a lot of people think was his secret treasure or his bank account. And inside the grips are scratched some numbers that a number of eyewitnesses have said that's either the combination to a safe or his bank account in Denver, Colorado.
In 1967, at the Sahara Gun Show in Las Vegas, Nevada, John W. Nielsen, who inherits the gun from his father, sells the gun to author and expert of antique and historic weapons, E. Dixon Larson. According to this original bill of sale, signed by John W. Nielsen, William M. Locke, known as the Dean of American Arms Collectors, signs as a witness to the gun transfer.
To the best of my knowledge, I believe this weapon to be as represented and property of Butch Cassidy from 1896 to 1900, signed by E. Dixon Larson.
One thing is for certain, the gun that Butch Cassidy leaves behind in that brief moment he comes out from hiding is the most fully documented Butch Cassidy gun in existence.
I think this is a fabulous piece of American history, and it should be placed in a fine collection, and it will be auctioned on September 30th, 2012 here at California Auctioneers.